Rafeal couldn't sleep, and the midnight call he made to Eala has the entire tennis world completely speechless. Stop whatever you are doing right now, tennis family, because what you are about to hear is not the kind of story that gets manufactured in a publicist's office or carefully crafted for a sponsor campaign. This is raw, this is real, and this is the kind of behind-the-scenes revelation that only surfaces when someone who has spent 2 decades guarding her privacy decides, in one quiet and extraordinary moment, that silence is no longer enough. We are talking about a story involving 3 of the most compelling figures in the modern tennis universe: a retired legend with 22 Grand Slam titles to his immortal name, his fiercely private and deeply remarkable wife, and a 20-year-old girl from Manila who has been quietly rewriting the entire history of her nation's relationship with this sport, one breathtaking match at a time. And at the center of it all sits a single phone call, made past midnight, from a man who could not sleep, to a young woman sitting alone in a hotel room in England carrying a weight that nobody around her fully understood. Nobody knew about that call. Not her coaching team, not the Philippine media, not the millions of fans who track her every result with the intensity of a nation starved for a sporting hero of this magnitude. Nobody, that is, except Mary Perello, the woman who has stood beside Rafeal Nadal through 22 Grand Slams, 2 retirements, 2 sons, and 19 years of unwavering loyalty, and who chose this moment, in front of a Spanish journalist at a foundation event in Mallorca, to finally let the world in. So settle in, because this one is going to take your breath away completely. To truly feel the seismic weight of this story, you have to go back to the very beginning, to a 12-year-old girl standing in an airport in Manila with a suitcase full of dreams and absolutely zero guarantees. The Philippines is a nation that bleeds basketball, that worships boxing, that turns its sporting heroes into something approaching deities. Tennis was not part of that cultural conversation in any meaningful way. There were no Filipino role models competing on the professional circuit, no blueprint to follow, no experienced voice you could call at 2 in the morning to ask how they survived the loneliness of being the only one from your country doing what you were trying to do. Eala arrived at the Rafeal Nadal Academy in Manila, Mallorca in 2018 at the age of 13, carrying a forehand that whispered enormous promise and a competitive spirit that the Academy's coaching staff almost immediately recognized as something genuinely uncommon. She had grown up watching a sport dominated by players who looked nothing like her, came from nothing like her background, and carried none of the specific cultural weight she brought with her to that sun-baked corner of Spain. She was brilliant, she was isolated, and she was entirely and ferociously self-motivated in a way that the Academy's coaches found deeply familiar, because it reminded them of someone very specific, someone whose name was on the building itself. The Academy did not care about geography or background or whether your home country had produced a single professional player before you walked through the doors. It cared about work ethic, competitive drive, and the kind of emotional control under pressure that cannot be coached into someone who doesn't already carry it naturally. And from her very first weeks in Manila, the staff understood they had something rare on their hands. The results confirmed it rapidly and spectacularly. At 14, she captured the Australian Open junior doubles title. Then came Roland Garros junior doubles glory. And then the moment that stopped an entire nation cold and sent shockwaves through the global tennis community in a way that nobody had fully anticipated. The 2022 U.S. Open junior singles crown, making Eala the first Filipino player in the entire history of that tournament to claim that title. She was 17 years old, standing on one of the most iconic courts in world sport, holding a trophy that no one from her country had ever held before. Rafeal Nadal, still competing at that point and waging his own deeply personal battle against injury and the relentless mathematics of a career approaching its extraordinary conclusion, watched with the particular attention of someone who recognized in her something that the casual observer could not quite name. But the junior circuit and the professional tour are 2 entirely different universes, separated by a gulf that has swallowed the careers of countless celebrated junior champions who never successfully made the crossing. Between 2023 and 2024, Eala entered qualifying rounds at Roland Garros, Wimbledon, and the U.S. Open in succession. And in each case she fell in the very first match of the qualifying bracket before the main draw had even begun. 3 consecutive Grand Slam qualifying exits. While her contemporary Miranda Andreeva, a player Eala had dismantled 6-4, 6-0 in the 2022 U.S. Open Junior quarterfinals, was establishing herself inside the top 40 of the WTA rankings. Eala sat at 140th in the world with nothing but potential and the quietly accumulating pain of repeated early exits. Those defeats did not simply sting and fade. They stacked on top of one another. They whispered the most corrosive question an ambitious young athlete can hear echoing inside their own mind late at night when the lights are off and the congratulatory messages have stopped arriving. What if I am simply not good enough for this level? What if the junior titles were the ceiling and not the foundation? What almost nobody outside her innermost circle fully grasped during that difficult stretch was that the hardest night of a young career had not yet arrived. It was still coming, gathering itself quietly like a storm building offshore. And when it finally made landfall, it would do so in the form of devastating silence in a darkened hotel room in England. But before we get to that midnight moment, you need to understand the extraordinary woman who made it possible for the world to know it ever happened at all. Maria Francisco Perello, known universally as Mary, is perhaps the most deliberately private significant other in the history of professional tennis, and that is a title she has earned through nearly 2 decades of conscious and purposeful choice. She met Rafeal Nadal at 17 through his sister in their shared hometown of Manacor, the same dusty, sun-soaked Mallorcan town where the academy now stands bearing his name. She watched him claim his first French Open title. She watched him conquer the grass of Wimbledon. She watched him weep at the Australian Open. She watched him lose, recover, lose again, and return each time as though defeat were merely a temporary detour on a road that only led upward. For 19 years she stood at his side through all of it, and she said almost nothing publicly about any of it whatsoever. While the partners of other elite tennis players built their own public profiles, launched personal brands, granted magazine interviews, and cultivated social media audiences of their own, Mary moved in precisely the opposite direction with quiet and total conviction. She earned a business management degree at the University of the Balearic Islands. She completed graduate studies at ESAID in Barcelona. She ran the charitable operations of the Rafeal Nadal Foundation with genuine dedication and real impact. She raised their first son, Rafa Jr., born in October 2022, almost entirely out of the public gaze. In August 2025, she welcomed their second son, Miguel, named in tender tribute to her late father who had passed away in April 2023, and the world only learned of the birthdays after it had already happened. This is a woman who treats privacy not as inconvenience, but as principle, who understands with a bone-deep certainty of lived experience what it costs a human being to exist permanently in the glare of public expectation, who spent nearly 2 decades watching her husband carry the weight of being the greatest in the world and learned personally and intimately what that kind of pressure does to the inner life of even the strongest competitor on the planet. Which is precisely why, when Mary Perello spoke about Alex Eala at a foundation event in Mallorca, captured by a Spanish journalist and spread across social media within hours of publication, the entire tennis world went completely and utterly still. Because Mary does not do this. She does not involve herself in tennis narratives. She does not comment publicly on her husband's former students or the young players who trained within the academy walls. She does not speak about the professional tour, its results, or its personalities unless something has moved her so profoundly and so personally that continued silence becomes a kind of betrayal of the truth. She was asked about Eala's remarkable 2025 season, about what the young Filipina's success meant to the academy community, and she paused before answering. Not the practiced pause of a diplomat carefully selecting neutral words, but the real pause of someone deciding in real time whether to share something genuine and unguarded. And then she did. Rafa cares about her in a way that goes beyond tennis, she said. When she struggles, he feels it. After her worst loss, he could not sleep. He called her. I was there. I heard the conversation. The room at that foundation event absorbed those words in absolute silence. Nobody had known about that call. Not Eala's management team. Not her coach Joan Bosch. Not the Philippine sports journalists who had covered every match of her career with passionate devotion. Not the fans who had turned her ranking updates into national news events. A midnight phone call from Rafeal Nadal after her most painful professional defeat, and the world had known nothing about it until his wife chose to speak. To understand why that call hit Eala with the force it clearly did, you have to understand what the 2025 Eastbourne Open final actually represented and what it cost her to lose it. By the time she arrived at Eastbourne that June, her season had already rewritten Philippine sporting history in ways that a year earlier would have seemed almost fantastical.